All right, I'm going to start by picking up where Sean left off a few weeks ago during one of his teachings on one of the parables of Jesus. So please turn to Matthew chapter 20. It's the parable of the landowner who went out several times during the day and kept recruiting more workers to come back in. All right. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Now when he agreed with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. He went out about the third hour, saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and said to them, "You also go into the vineyard. Whatever is right, I will give you." So they went. Again he went out about the 6th and 9th hour, did likewise. About the 11th hour he went out and found others standing idle, and said to them, "Why have you been standing here idle all day?" And they said, "Nobody's hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard. Whatever is right, you will receive." So when evening had come, the owner of the vineyard said to his steward, "Call the laborers and give them their wages, beginning with the last to the first." When those who came were hired, who had been hired about the 11th hour, they each received a denarius. When the first came, they supposed that they would receive more, and they likewise received each a denarius. When they had received it, they complained against the landowner, saying, "These last men have worked only 1 hour. You have made them equal to us who have borne the burden and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them and said, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way. I wish to give to this last man the same as to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? Or is your eye evil because I am good?" All right, what I want to look at this morning, and I appreciated very much Sean's point about the order of who got paid. That the guys that had been there all day needed the lesson that the landowner tried to teach them of seeing what he paid the people who showed up just at the end of the day. Now, if you can, keep your place there because we're coming back, but I want to look for a minute at, I guess, if you will, the measuring rod we're going to use to evaluate this. So please turn to Romans chapter 4 for a couple minutes. Here we go. Romans chapter 4, Paul is going to talk about faith. And while his primary context is faith unto salvation, it certainly applies to our ongoing growth in faith. Romans chapter 4, starting at the beginning. "What then shall we say that Abraham our father has found according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he had something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, it was accounted to him for righteousness. Now him who works, the wages are not counted as grace, but as debt." Now, this is going to apply back to the wages. "But to him who does not work, but believes on God, on him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is accounted for righteousness. Just as David also describes the blessedness of the man to whom God imputes righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord shall not impute sin." All right. In this passage, Paul sets out a contrast between faith and obligation. And as he goes on, he kind of pretty much equates obligation to a different way of saying justifying ourselves by our own works. But for the application today and for what we're going to look at, I like the word obligation because I think it gets to an often hidden mindset that we can have. Now, Paul says obligation has its proper place. Verse 4, "Him who works, the wages are not counted as grace, but as debt." We've all had some sort of job at one form or another, and we pretty much expect to get paid every week or 2 weeks or twice a month, whatever it is. Our employer owes us the money. That is a reasonable and legitimate obligation on his part, and we have a reasonable expectation to be paid. However, this mindset does not, and cannot be applied to our relationship with God. Unfortunately, that doesn't keep us from trying. See, one of the problems is that it's you're going to shoot yourself in the foot if you do that. Because David talks about the blessedness of the man to whom God imputes righteousness apart from works. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven. It is so easy for us to get that if we start keeping score according to obligation, guess which way the score goes? Obligation is a very dangerous tool to try to use in our relationship with God. It will backfire on us. We're going to see that. Okay, obligation versus faith. Let's go ahead and turn back to Matthew. And I want to focus on those early workers, the guys who worked all day long and only got a denarius, only got what they were promised. In chapter 20, in the story, verse 10, when the first workers came, they supposed they would receive more. Supposed. Key word. And I looked it up. Love to look up Greek. The Greek word nomizo, and I have no idea if I'm pronouncing it right, but we'll go with it. It comes from the root nomos, which is translated law. And the word nomizo that Paul uses here, Strong's translate, the first thing they say in their explanation is to do by law, to do according to law. And it confirms the idea of obligation based on law or common practice. This is the normally expected way things get done. And unfortunately, we tend to camouflage or dress up the attitude of obligation in, this is right, that's not fair, this is what you should do. But at the root of all those, if we're not very careful, can be the idea of, this is what I want. Now, in this particular case, I'm kind of with the guys who start out, wait a minute. I'm in hour 8. I'm starting hour 8, and I don't know if I'm pruning or digging or what, but it's hot. It's, they've borne the heat of the day. It wasn't pleasant working conditions. And now George over here comes out the last hour, and, he puts in some work. He does a good, solid job for the hour, but there's no way I'm going to compare his work to my work. Wait a minute. You're paying him a denarius for 1 hour's work, and you're still paying me only a denarius for 8 hours' work. I'm sorry, this is an understandable starting point. I'd be with them. I would hope that I'd be willing to learn the lesson that Jesus is trying to teach here. But I'd be lying to myself and everybody else if I said, nah, I would never think that way. You see, the problem with obligation is not the desire. That can unfortunately be part of the camouflage. The desire can be perfectly reasonable, understandable. I would expect that even, the guys that worked 1 hour, they weren't expecting a denarius. Hey, I only worked 1 hour. I appreciate the work, and I'll take whatever, what the landlord says, whatever is appropriate. Gives them a whole denarius. Go, I did not deserve this. Thank you very much. But the lesson is to the guys that worked all day. Because their mistake wasn't the desire or the, expectation that, he's giving him 1 denarius, maybe I'm going to get 2, 3, or 4. I don't know, man. This could look good. It's not the desire. It's not the expectation by itself. It's how we act on it. And in their hearts, They looked at the landowner and said, "You owe me more." They took a reasonable expectation. Custom is not a law. This wasn't a union shop. And as the master says, he could do what he wanted with his money. But the expectation in their hearts turned into an imposed obligation towards the landowner. Can you see that? Because that's the heart of what I want to communicate today. That's the problem. That's what Jesus was trying to get at. And as I already said, biblical faith is contrary to obligation. Biblical faith starts with the idea that God doesn't owe us anything. We owe Him. We can say that, and yeah, it's true, and I'm unworthy, and it's all unmerited favor and all that. But crunch time comes, where are we at? God, that's not right. God bless them. The White family are having to deal with that right now. Because I know what I'd be struggling with. Big things, little things. I occasionally mention the jerk that cuts me off on the interstate. You stupid jerk. Obligation. He's not supposed to do that. Custom. It might not be reckless. It might not be a technical violation of law, but it's certainly impolite. Self-centered and rude and, maybe a little unsafe. You stupid jerk. And this is a key indicator of how I'm handling that in my heart. Do I get angry or upset? I appreciate the teaching that once said, anger is often an indicator that you're hanging on to a right and haven't surrendered it. There's a lot of truth to that. And I don't have to look any farther than the guy in the mirror to see that. And here's why this is so dangerous. The more we base our relationship with God and life, including our relationship with each other, on obligation, the more we blind ourselves to God's goodness. Verse 15. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my things? Or is your eye evil because I am good? Instead of rejoicing in the generosity of the master towards George, who just put in the 1 hour, I'm mentally pounding my fist on the table saying, I deserve more. It's similar to unforgiveness. Jesus repeatedly talked about, when we're praying, God forgive us as we forgive others. Now, if I don't forgive poor Doug back there for some unmentioned offense, I'm going to pick on you for 10 seconds, Doug. If I don't forgive him, Jesus says, I'm not going to get forgiven. Now, I don't take that literally. I don't mean, Jay didn't forgive Doug. I'm not going to forgive him. What it does do is cut me off from experiencing his forgiveness. I'm setting the rules. God's letting me be in charge, and that can be a scary thing. God's letting me be in charge. And I decide my relationship with Doug is going to be based on obligation. God's saying, Jay, I don't think you're going to like it, but if you want to live by obligation, you get to live by obligation. And all of a sudden, God's love gets distant. And I have trouble trusting in his forgiveness when I mess up. Which a lot of times winds up meaning I have trouble admitting I mess up. Because, as I said before, faith is the opposite. Faith does not work on obligation. God owes us nothing. God owes us nothing. And Jesus in verse 15 again, is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? Yes, there's a custom, Mr. Worker, that there's legitimate reason or argument or justification for the idea that I could pay you more. But that's not what rules me. I get to rule me, says Jesus. I get to decide what rule, what law applies when. Sometimes that means when we want something right now, God says, nope, it's time for the rule of patience for a while. Are you willing to learn that? Who gets to decide which rule applies? You got it. He does. An obligation can be a backdoor way of us trying to dictate terms to Jesus. What he should do, what he shouldn't do, what he should allow, what he shouldn't allow, and when he should or should not do these things. And when he doesn't come through, and ladies and gentlemen, I guarantee you, sooner or later, he will not live up to our expectations and obligations. I said sooner or later, I'm guessing a lot of times it's going to be sooner because he knows there's a real issue here that needs work. Because we're cutting ourselves off from his love and mercy. Jesus didn't say in the parable at all what would happen if the day-long workers came right at the start, after that and said, Jesus, I'm really glad you covered George. His family's struggling. He's been having trouble finding work. They could really use that. Would it be out of line to ask for a second denarius? Leaving the decision in Jesus' hands. Not obligation, but asking. Jesus might have said, no, not this time. The right heart would have said, that's not a problem. You gave me what you said you would. Appreciate it. You need more work tomorrow? Let me know. See the difference in heart attitude? I'm not deciding what he should do. I'm accepting his right to decide what to do. I want to look at 2 episodes from the Gospels. This is a parable, and I love parables because a lot of times, you get the feeling like Jesus had something in mind with a lot of this. He remembers the time when, maybe he was out, as a 12-year-old boy working in a vineyard for one day and saw something like that. Who knows? But I like the actual episodes where we can see things in practice. Luke chapter 4, please. Luke chapter 4. This chapter is probably best known for when Jesus reads Isaiah in the synagogue, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. Beautiful passage. And he's still in the synagogue when the rest of this happens. We're not going to look at that directly. Luke chapter 4, I'm going to start in verse 20. Then he closed the book, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all who were in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. I am offering you so much. Set the captives free. Bind up the brokenhearted. In verse 22, Saul bore witness to him and marveled at the gracious words which proceeded out of his mouth. And he said, is not this Joseph's son? Now, the next 2 verses are going to be Jesus' view of what's in their hearts. We don't see them expressing it as much as we did with the workers, but this is what Jesus sees in their hearts. Verse 23, and he said to them, you will surely say to this proverb to me, physician, heal yourself. Whatever we have heard done in Capernaum, do also here in your country. They got their own agenda. Is it a wrong agenda? Is it wrong to want or hope or expect for Jesus to heal? You see, again, it's not the desire that's wrong. It's how we handle it and how we relate to God in the midst of that desire. Verse 24 said, "Assuredly I say to you, no prophet has accepted his own country." What Jesus just, said, this is how what's in your hearts is dishonoring to him. Not a good place to be. Not a good place to be. Now, verse 25. "But I tell you truly, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months. There was a great famine throughout all the land. But to none of them was Elijah sent, except to Zarephath in the region of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow, a Gentile widow. And many lepers were in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, but none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian," again, a Gentile. This is Jesus' answer to the people of his hometown. I don't owe you a thing. Now, he's not saying it in a way of, I'm writing you off, I don't want to owe you anything, I don't want to care about you at all, goodbye. But he's trying to get to the thing in their heart that's going to keep them from experiencing the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bind up the brokenhearted, to set the captives free. They need to hear this if they're going to respond in faith, because obligation blinds us to the goodness of God. Unfortunately, they don't learn the lesson. Verse 28, "So all those in the synagogue, when they heard these things, were filled with wrath. They rose up, thrust him out of the city, led him to the brow of the hill on which their city was built, that they might throw him down over the cliff. Passing through the midst of them, he went his way." Anger. Anger. You owe us. And the impression I get is that they were basing that obligation on the fact we're descendants of Abraham. Because that seems to be what Jesus is speaking to here. Yeah, there have been men of God that had nothing for the descendants of Abraham, but went to the Gentiles instead and blessed them. And this is not the only time this is a factor. Both John the Baptist and Jesus, once or twice each, spoke really directly to that. You think because you're children of Abraham. I think it was Jesus, one of them said, I tell you the truth, God can raise up from these stones children of Abraham. In other words, that's not a big deal. In some senses, obviously it is, but not in the sense they wanted to make it. We're children of Abraham. We deserve. We have a corner on God's goodness. God owes us. We homeschooled. Our children should have all turned out well. We tithe. We shouldn't have any financial problems. And the list can go on and on and on. Where we take something that's good, something God's given to us, something that's specifically scriptural, and we stand it on his head and say, God, you owe me. And when God doesn't come through, we're anywhere from upset to downhearted to angry. And like I said, this can apply to our relationship with other people too. I have a real suspicion that this is one of the greatest causes of marital difficulties. All right. Other passage I want to look at in the Gospels, I'm going to do something slightly strange. Can I have a couple guys hand these out, please? There we go. Thank you. There's plenty. A lot of different specific episodes in the Gospels happen or recorded in more than one of the Gospels. And something you'll find most of the time is that each writer adds in one or two details that the others don't mention. And that's the case here. We're going to look at the faith of a Gentile mother. One where Jesus started out just being flat out rude to her. Matthew and Mark both wrote the story. Each one's got some details. And I wanted the whole story, so I did something I do in my personal studies a fair amount of time, is I just combined them. You are welcome to go back and sort out which one's from Matthew and which one's from Mark. There's nothing added there. It's all scripture. The verse numbers are entirely arbitrary just so it's easy for us to communicate. Otherwise, verse 28 would be before verse 17. And now we're going to see the flip side. We've seen obligation. Now I want us to see faith. From there, he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. He entered a house and wanted no one to know it, but he could not be hidden. For a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him. She came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth. She kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter, saying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed." But he answered her not a word. His disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away. She cries out after us." But he answered and said, "I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And she came and worshipped him, saying, "Lord, help me." But Jesus said to her, "Let the children be filled first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." I want to stop there for a second. Anybody ever had any trouble with that verse? I used to too. Good grief, Jesus. Would you have a bad day? Fall out of bed? Got a headache? I don't know. But you hear in that the same thing he said to his hometown. You have no way to put obligation on me. But now, verse 10 is one of the most amazing verses, as far as I'm concerned, you can find. And she answered and said to him, "Yes, Lord." Oh my God. Pardon me. "Yes, Lord. Yet even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs." Jesus communicates in absolutely no uncertain terms. You are unworthy. And not just in what he says, first in the fact that he doesn't say and he ignores her for a while. You know, to the point where the disciples are saying, "Look, boss, if you're not going to do anything, can we send her away? This is getting kind of tiresome." "Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord." And that goes back to what David was quoted as saying in Romans. Blessed is the man whose sins are forgiven. You see, when we first approach Jesus, but then to be saved, but then also down the road as he's trying to get his finger on things, and we realize somehow that there's something in my heart that just isn't right. We have to abandon the rule of obligation. I'm guilty. I was impatient, I lost my temper, I was lazy, I was, fill in the blank. Obligation doesn't work then. And the only way we can get past that to experiencing Jesus' mercy, his cleansing, and his victory and a restored or a deepened relationship is to let go of obligation and recognize, Jesus, you don't owe me, I owe you, I'm wrong. And the person or people I've wronged, I owe them, they don't owe me. And discover all over again the wonderful truth that Jesus came to cancel debts, not to enforce them. Now, if we insist on enforcing debts, unfortunately, hell is going to be populated by people who think they got a bum deal. I think most of you know I used to be a chaplain in jail, and prison life is not a pleasant experience. And even apart from the occasional horror stories you hear, just daily life among a bunch of people who are quite convinced they got a bum deal and the system's out to get them, and they have no justice in their own hearts because they're unable to see it in God, who's trying desperately to get their attention. I appreciate the inmates who say, God sent me to jail so I could get saved. They're willing to accept the humbling that God didn't owe them, society didn't owe them, that they owed God. This woman is starting there. Anybody here want to raise your hand and say you'd be able to handle that as well as she did? I'm sure not gonna. She did. Hear Jesus' response. Then he said to her, "O woman, great is your faith. For this saying, go your way, the demon has gone out of your daughter." When she had come to her house, she found the demon gone out and her daughter lying on the bed. I want to point out a couple things about this lady. I really wish we knew more of her story. I am very impressed. I am very, very impressed. First of all, she is only one of two people in the Gospels that affirm to Jesus, "You are the Son of David." Now, I'm not counting the crowd at the grand procession, because they bailed on him real quick. Hosanna to the Son of David, well, it was popular. And there's other discussion, could this be the Son of David? But only two people in the Gospels, on all four of the Gospels, actually, "You are the Son of David." And this is one of them. Blind Bartimaeus is the other, in case you're curious. Now, I want to know, how did she come to know the scriptures about the Son of David? She's a Gentile. She's a woman. Ask the woman at the well about how well that works out. Now, the Samaritans were a special case. There's a history going back explaining the bad blood between the Jews and the Samaritans. But still, this is a Gentile and a woman. How did she have a chance, and not just a casual one-time hearing a snippet of some teaching? The concept of the Son of David is not at the top of theology. It's important, but it's not where people usually start. And yet she's got enough of a grasp of it to recognize, one, first to believe, whole idea, someone's going to come. The heir to David's throne. She's got enough faith to recognize, that's the guy. And she understands that she doesn't need to deserve. She can put her trust in Jesus and his mercy and who he is, and not have to try and dictate turns and obligate him into healing her. I said she's one of only two people who affirmed Jesus as the Son of David. She was also one of two people who Jesus, as far as I could tell, who Jesus said, "Great is your faith." The other is the Roman centurion. She is in very special company and small group of people that we meet in the Gospels. She's a very amazing woman. And she passed the obligation test with flying colors. All right, wrapping it up. Shouldn't take more than 30 minutes. Point I've made a couple times. Obligation can seek the same worthwhile goals as faith. I've said it a couple times. The goal, the desire, is not always the issue. Now, if the goal or desire is to win the lottery so I can, retire and all that, that's another question. But the goals we saw here were not wrong goals. Either the workers, hey, everybody could use a little extra money. And the people of his hometown, we want to see you do miracles. We want to see you heal here. The difference is not so much the goal as to where is our trust. And that's an inward issue. And that's not always easy for us to sort out, because we can be really, 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 really good at convincing ourselves, well, I've got a good goal. This must be the right way to go. And this is how it should happen. I think we've seen that the test a lot of times is how do you respond when Jesus tries to communicate to you that, no, I'm not obligated. No, you don't deserve. No, I don't owe you. Not because he doesn't want to do it, but because he knows that heart issue will continue to separate that person from his love, from his forgiveness. In the Romans passage, we saw that forgiveness is received through faith, not through obligation. I am really confident that every last person in this room, including the guy in the mirror, has obligation issues. Matter of fact, God's been kind of pointing some out to me in the last few days. And for a little while I was thinking, well, I got to stop giving teachings, because all too often God fingers me with the same thing I'm going to share. But that's okay. That's okay. Obligation will respond to unmet expectation with anger, frustration maybe, discouragement, complaining. Ooh. Faith responds, as we've seen with that woman, a steadfast trust in the love and faithfulness of the Son of God. Obligation can result in anger, something I haven't mentioned yet, and I kind of wish I had more time to, but faith responds with gratefulness. If I loan Peter, $20 because he forgot to bring his wallet, and he pays me back next week, well, it's nice he paid me back, but I'm not going to go around telling everybody, hey, everybody, isn't it neat? Peter paid me back. No, that's the expected norm. Incidentally, I have every confidence that Peter would pay me back. But there's no need for any much gratefulness. Obligation eliminates gratefulness. Results in anger instead. Faith can receive the undeserved gift. Obligation can't. Obligation's got to be able to explain why somehow it's right, it's appropriate, I should get that. I think something we all do at different times in different ways is somebody wants to bless us and someone like, oh no, you don't have to do that. I think maybe there's some obligation behind that. I haven't deserved that. Even some small thing. We need to learn to be able to receive what we haven't earned and what isn't owed us in one form or another. Because that's the doorway to grace. That's the doorway to peace, to joy, to knowing His love that He desperately wants us to know. It's not that He doesn't love us. We're approaching Him all wrong. See, everything that God has for us, large, small, salvation, down to, whatever, is an undeserved gift. An obligation is going to keep us from experiencing various aspects or various depths of what He has for us. So I would encourage us all to be willing to bite the bullet and be willing to recognize that when God's trying to figure obligation in our hearts in some form or way, our relationship with Him and our relationship with others. And I'm pretty confident that's a pretty good indicator. Because that's the necessary and uncomfortable or even painful step to experiencing more of His goodness. I love the first couple of chapters of Ephesians, and a lot of speakers talk about that. It's neat stuff. And you're chosen, you're accepted in the beloved, you're foreordained, you're seated in the heavenlies, just on and on and on. Just neat stuff. What challenges me or encourages me in all that is Paul twice takes time out to pray for the Ephesians and for all his readers, including us, that we get it from the heart. God loves us. He wants us to know that. Not just so we can pass the quiz. He wants us to know it in here. And sometimes our biggest enemy to knowing that is ourselves, through obligation. So let's let God do a little bit of surgery so He can bring some healing, some wholeness, some greater joy, some greater peace. Let me pray.